One of the questions we get asked a lot when we're on the road meeting new people is, what do we use for internet? And we've answered that question a lot in person. We've answered it online.
So I figured we'd put together a video.
Yeah, so here we are. And, so in this video, we'll kind of, a little high level. We're not going to go deep into any one particular area, but we figured we'll go, just with kind of an overview of what our setup is and how we landed on it, what the advantages and disadvantages are of each piece of our system and kind of how they complement each other, and then a summary of how we have each piece set up, both physically and from a kind of like a networking standpoint.
Yeah. And then we'll talk about just some things that you might want to take into consideration when you're booking campgrounds, if internet is a priority for you, like it is for us. So just to start off, why internet was so important to us. I work a remote job, and it's your normal 9-to-5 kind of corporate job. And so being connected remotely is absolutely required. It's not an option. And we also knew going into it that we weren't going to be able to rely on campground Wi-Fi. It's also not feasible for me to be going to coffee shops or anything like that to work. Like, I need to work from here with my setup because I enjoy my setup, but also, I've got all sorts of confidential materials and stuff like that that I can't be sharing in a public space. And so that's why it was so important for us to set up something super reliable.
Yeah, and it's not the type of job that you can do the work and do the work offline. No. And get someplace and upload it later.
I've got to do Teams calls.
Yeah, you're on video conferences and in contact with people. So so we knew we needed something that was going to be reliable, and for us and for a lot of people, that reliability equals redundancy. So
there's no one solution.
Yeah, there's not. So our overall internet solution is made up of a couple of different things. It did evolve over time, but it evolved very quickly. And, so our system isn't necessarily going to be what everybody needs. You don't need to be as connected. You definitely don't need everything we have. But parts of it could work for anybody. So, we'll go through it and maybe you'll take something away from it.
Yeah. And besides work, we do live in our rig full time. Yeah. So it's our home, and we do want to be able to stream TV as well. Yeah. So,
binge watch The Bear.
Binge watch The Bear. If you haven't watched it yet on Hulu, check it out. It's so good. It makes me hungry though. Anyway.
So when it came to figuring out what we were going to need when we hit the road, we started looking, months before we actually left, and started looking around, watching a lot of YouTube videos, looking online, like a lot of people do. And we found a lot of good information and a lot of people using similar setups, anything from just hotspotting off their phone to using cellular hotspots, and in a couple of cases we found people who were legitimately working from the road, and I think Changing Lanes was one where they went through their whole setup and they went through how it had evolved over time and 3 or 4 different iterations to where they finally were and what was working for them. And we just kind of looked at it at the sense of,
let's start there.
Yeah, we don't need to make the same, journey that these other people have. They've already done it.
Yeah,
let's just start at their end. So that's what we did, and we went over to Mobile Must Have because they came highly recommended, and we would highly recommend mobilemustHave.com. We'll put links in the description. They're a wealth of knowledge. Got a ton of parts and pieces that you can purchase. They put bundles together. They offer cell phone plans.
Great support.
Yeah,
too,
they offer a lot of support to help you get your stuff set up or to get your stuff working again should something happen. We've had to do that with some tech support when we had a router fail, and they were great. So can't recommend them enough. But so we started off with our bundle of a cellular router, external antenna, and the cellular router we chose had dual SIM card slots, so we could have 2 SIM cards from different companies in there as redundancy. And that's what we hit the road with. After testing it at the house for a while. We tested it at home.
It worked great.
Yeah, we got on the road. We took 3 days to get from Florida to Texas, and we were going to be staying 8 weeks in this one particular spot in Texas. and the campground was like a black hole of service. So
Yeah.
nobody's cell stuff worked there.
Despite what the coverage maps for the carrier say.
Yeah, so that was...
There was like just enough that I could work, but I started to panic because this was not going to work long term if that was our only solution.
Well. Yeah, we were 3 days into our new life and we were already hitting, roadblocks with our setup. So thankfully, at the time, Starlink had been around, but they had just started opening it up for travel. This was before, yes baby, this was before any of the roam plans or portability even existed, but they had just opened it so that you could move out of your home area.
Yeah.
So we jumped on that. We ordered Starlink that first week we were in Texas. I think it took us 13 days to get it.
Yeah.
And
got it set up super easy.
Yeah, it never looked back. It's been
game changer.
Yeah, it's been a game changer. Not to say that our cellular, router is not still key to our setup. It is.
Yeah.
And, we use it all the time if cellular works. We use Starlink all the time if Starlink works in an area.
It just adds another element of redundancy for us.
Yeah. Again, we'll go ahead and we'll
jump into each one.
Yeah, we'll get a little deeper into each one and go from there.
Yeah.
So to get started on the hardware, starting with our cellular router or mobile router, it's a Peplink Max Transit Duo is the one we have. It's since been replaced by the Max Transit Duo Pro. Again, that router has dual SIM card slots, and it's the ability to use 2 different SIMs from 2 different carriers, so that you're not locked into just AT&T service or just Verizon service. You can actually be using both, depending on what works better in the area you're in. Also compatible with Starlink or any other campground Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi that may be around using Wi-Fi as WAN. It can pull those in and help use that in the Wi-Fi signal it generates for you. Over at Mobile Must Have, they've got bundles that include external antennas for your rig, some additional wiring, additional heat sinks if you're going to be mounting it in a really hot location. They can set you up with what you need. And like we already said, then they offer tech support, and then cellular plans. They've got those too, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we do our cell plans?
I was gonna do another take.
Oh, we're gonna do another take on that. We'll be back.
So as it relates to the cellular plans, as we said, we have 2 SIM cards. And so our idea was to have one directly through a carrier and another one through a reseller. So the plans that you'll get from a carrier are typically a little bit higher in price and lower data caps. But in theory, they're a little bit more stable of a plan. The ones that you can get from a reseller are typically a little bit cheaper and can have higher data caps, but in some cases they can just be canceled kind of at a moment's notice or like with no notice at all. Mobile Must Have does offer these some of these SIM cards with data packages on them. I think currently they're offering like 300 gigs to 1,000 gigs of 5G. So for us right now, we have AT&T directly through the carrier, and then we have a Verizon SIM card that's through Mobile Must Have's data plan.
Yeah, and that's been working really well for us. Gives us the flexibility of both networks. The other thing that's nice is with cellular in general, as far as our system goes, some of its strengths are it can work in tree cover and things like that where Starlink struggles. And it does have a lower latency, so things like gaming, which we're not big gamers, but work calls, like Zoom calls, web calls, that's where they can really struggle if there's a lot of latency in the connection. That's where you get like jittery connection and lag.
Cellular tends to perform better.
Pretty good at that. One of the limitations with cellular though is you need to be in a coverage area. There needs to be cell towers around for you to connect to, and there has to be bandwidth on those towers for you to use. There's challenges with that, and like our current campground, there is, this town.
Zero.
This town has
zero cell coverage.
No, we'll show you the emergency phone.
Oh yeah.
To call 911.
It's just
from the town.
Don't need it.
Yeah. All right. So Starlink. Yeah, can't say enough nice things about it.
Game changer.
Yeah, it truly has been a game changer for us. It's what's allowing you to work this week.
Yes.
From this town
with no cell service.
And even when we got into town this week, the town's Wi-Fi was out.
Yeah, so nobody had internet,
yeah,
but we did.
Yeah, we did. So, and in either case, like we said, we got it pretty early on. Still is, we have Gen 2, so it's the square or the rectangular articulated dishy. They do have roam plans for travelers now that have come out since we got started. We're grandfathered in on standard plus portability, so essentially it's a residential plan that lets you travel. They don't offer that anymore. You can do standard, which is residential, or you can do roam, which is the ability to move. And those keep changing around as they come out with new versions and new devices. But that's kind of our high level setup with Starlink.
Yeah. And some of the advantages to Starlink is basically anywhere you have a clear view of the sky, Starlink will work. So you're not limited to there being cell towers on the ground. We've used it coast to coast. We've used it across the entire US. We've used it in really rural areas as well as bigger cities, and it's performed the same.
Yeah, and even with the clear view of the sky thing, I mean, it's typically, at least in all the areas we've been in, it's northeast that it wants to look at. And we've been in some places where we haven't had the best view, but we've set it up maybe out of necessity, and it still works.
Yeah.
We have been in some really big tree cover, like in the redwoods, where
you just don't even bother.
It did not work. But we've had it fairly obstructed, and it's still been enough, to do some work.
Yeah.
Not good for Zoom calls or things like that in those cases.
And so that brings me to the limitation, which is just that if you are in a really heavily wooded area, it's not going to work. Or the more obstructions that you have, that is where you will start to see some of those increases in latency. So it doesn't cause an issue if you're necessarily trying to stream a movie or something like that, but if you're on a Teams call or something, that's where you'll start to see some of those hiccups.
You'll find out what streaming services deal better with choppy service, because some do. Some are better than others.
Like Netflix.
Yeah,
great.
Netflix is fine. Apple TV doesn't not like it. Yeah. Amazon's pretty good.
So now that we gave you a really high level overview of what our two modes of internet are, we're going to talk you through how we have it set up, both physically within the rig as well as from a network standpoint. So starting with the router.
Yeah, so starting with the cellular router and its physical location and setup. We've got ours in one of the lockers. It's kind of like the AV locker. It's where the DVD player and the radio are. We have ours mounted there, and we have our cellular router tied into our 12-volt system for power. That way it is powered from the house batteries in the rig, not reliant on shore power. We've said this in another video where we talked about the micro air thermostat. We use that thermostat to monitor temperature in the rig for our dogs. So if we were to lose power in a campground, we'd lose the ACs, but our internet will stay up and we'll still get alerts. So that's important to us. And that's just one of the nice features there.
Otherwise, that router does plug in to 120.
You can plug it into 120.
And that's how we did it for a long time, but then we routed it to 12 volt.
Yeah, it was one of those things. It was the plan from the beginning. It just took a little bit to actually do it. And it is mounted inside a cabinet, so I've got an on-off switch external to the cabinet so we can power cycle it if we need to. Yes, I know the switch is mounted upside down. That was by design. In case something were to fall off from above the switch and hit it, it hopefully won't turn it off. So that's why the switch is upside down. It's by design. And with these routers, you end up with the ability to use stubby antennas, or you can use external antennas for a better, stronger signal. We've done both, and have some opinions on how well one works versus the others, or more so. I will say this. The external antenna definitely works better than the stubby antennas.
Yes.
The location of that external antenna was surprisingly not as important in our case.
Yeah. Ours lives inside in the locker.
Our external antenna is internal to the rig, and we saw very little signal degradation or change in service from where it was located. So it really just came down to the point where
it's just easier.
It just wasn't worth it to move to deal with moving it outside. That being said, though, with the Airstreams any of the later model Airstreams, I don't remember the year exactly, but sometime in the late teens, 2017, 18, maybe even before that. I'll try to look it up and put it below. They've started coming pre-wired for Airstream Connect, which is a cellular service that Airstream offers from the factory, and it uses a Peplink router and an external antenna. So you can, just like we have. So you can get that from the factory. If you don't have it from the factory, there's a spot on the roof that's cut and capped that's waiting for an external antenna with wires right underneath the surface that run inside. And I know in our case and a lot of the other trailers I've seen, that's going to be in the front. In our case, like, we have a front bed, so it's in the front, and it's in the driver's side locker above the bed. There's a panel there that you can pull, and in there you'll find the wires leading up to the roof that would be for the antenna, and you'll also see a 12-volt wire waiting for you to power the router. Now, the other end of that 12-volt line is typically run into the 12-volt distribution block, but it is not hooked up. Mm-hmm. So you'd also have to do that, which in our case is under our bed. We didn't put ours in that locker; we put it in a different locker. So I pulled power from our radio. Another nice feature with having this router is it does have GPS. So part of that external antenna or the stubby antennas is a GPS antenna. So when our system is on, we are broadcasting a GPS location that we can also find if we needed to.
God forbid it got stolen.
Yeah, as long as our Wi-Fi is on, we've got a location.
So as far as how we have the network set up for our cellular router, again, we have the 2 SIM cards, and so that allows me to go in and select exactly which SIM I want to be using, which carrier I want to be using. And then the nice part is, because we can pull in other Wi-Fi, which for us, our secondary is our Starlink Wi-Fi, but we could always pull in like a campground Wi-Fi if we really wanted to. It will fail over to that. So let's say the cell signal drops with AT&T, it will pick up Starlink. And so if I'm on a call or something, I might just notice like a quick drop, but then it's just picked right back up because I'm logged into that particular network, but it's actually picked up the other Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and there's some other tools that Peplink offers. One is their Speed Fusion Connect that lets you do more. You can pull in multiple sources of internet, and it will essentially like combine them into one source. So if you had multiple SIMs, you had Starlink, you had a campground Wi-Fi, it could literally take that and kind of bundle all those different things into one form of internet and push that out on your Wi-Fi. So if one went down, it doesn't fail over to anything. It's just part of the signal drops and there's more coming. With that, there's also, a ton of settings. There's a lot there. These things are made for enterprise solutions, business solutions, and you get the tools with it to do that. In the case of the Speed Fusion Connect, it is a subscription-based service, so there's a fee that comes with that. We
just haven't felt the need to do it.
Yeah, we haven't felt the need to do it, so we don't. Instead, we do keep the Peplink running on its own network and Starlink running on its own network. So in a case where we're in a site where both are working, we have both running independently. Starlink is still the backup for our Peplink, so if cellular fails, it'll use the Wi-Fi from Starlink, but Starlink's still up and running on its own. It just it gives us some more flexibility. It lets us keep Francis's work stuff fully on one network doing its thing. I could have, I could be watching a movie or doing something else or uploading, one of these great videos that we do on a different network that's not touching hers at all.
That way your play doesn't impact my work.
My work doesn't affect her work.
Your work, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to Starlink and how we have that set up. So from a physical standpoint, we have Dishy mounted on a pole. And so you'll see lots of people talk about, using the pole so that you can get it above tree cover. That is absolutely helpful, but we actually mount ours to the pole as a default, regardless. And so we only run it out on the ground if we need to get out of the tree cover. Otherwise, we prefer to have it up on the pole because it keeps it and the cord just a little bit more protected. Yeah. So when you're in a campground, you know, people come by and mow, weed whack, walk through your campsite. Yeah. It just gives us a little bit more peace of mind that the Starlink is safe and protected.
I mean, we've just seen too many horror stories of people, you know, the dish gets nicked by somebody driving by, or
run over.
You know, it gets run over fully and destroyed. So yeah, having it on the pole keeps it protected. The cable runs underneath our rig, so it's protected. We still fully have the ability to deploy it on the ground if we need to.
Which we have still done when we needed to.
Yeah, if we're under some trees and we need to get out to a clear area, we can do that. Again, it's redundancy, or at least in this case, it's flexibility.
Yeah.
Dishy is outside. Our router is inside. It lives behind our TV. We've got a smart plug on the outside, which Airstream is now including on new rigs, so that's really nice. And Gen 3 Starlink is using RJ45Ns with, you know, custom kind of dust or waterproof cover on them. But yeah, so it's starting to be a lot easier to hook these systems up. In our case, we added the smart plug on the outside. We had to cut our cable, add some RJ45s to it.
There's another video about that.
Yeah, which we've got a video on modifying the cables. And if you'd like to see a video that really goes into detail on our full setup, how we brought the cable inside, how we mounted it behind our TV, let us know and we can put that together. I've started that video 2 or 3 times.
Never finished it, but we get questions about it all the time.
Yeah, so if you want to see it, I can do it. Otherwise, in the meantime, I'll put a link in the description to a document that we put together. It's out on our shared Google Drive, and it's got pictures and posts of our system as it evolved. It's got parts list, it's got how-tos, it's got links to the video of how to modify the cable.
It's got everything.
Yeah, it's got everything there.
Yeah.
So I'll put that down below so you can see that. Otherwise, like I said, if you want to see a video like that, let us know. And, you know, if you like this type of content, do us a favor and like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps us out. Yeah. So as far as networking, the networking side of Starlink, I pretty much already talked about that with the Peplink stuff, and saying that we run Starlink on its own network and keep it separate, but it is still the backup for the Peplink.
It just gives us better flexibility. That way we can actually just pick which network we want to connect the device to.
And not challenge each other for bandwidth.
Yeah. So when Billy is booking campgrounds and travel, he does all of that. I come behind him and I look at it to see what our internet coverage is going to look like. So I will pull up the coverage maps from the cellular carriers, and I'll look at it to see, you know, is there, you know, 5G LTE service there? Again, our router only accepts LTE, but if you're in an area that's got 5G, you're good.
Yeah, and there are routers out there, and the new ones are 5G compatible. A lot of them. Ours is not.
Yeah, but I'll look at the coverage maps just to see, are we in an area where it looks pretty solid, or does it look a little sparse? I will say though that you can't always trust the coverage maps. The other thing that I'll do just to see how well Starlink might perform is I'll look at Google Earth to compare an overhead to the campground map.
Yeah, especially if it's a campground that we get to pick
our site and lock in that site.
Then we'll look.
We'll look to see, is there a particular area of the campground that does seem like it's open and free from trees, because then we will try to book that. The only thing I would say about relying on Google Earth is keep in mind, if you're looking at locations that are further north that get heavier winters, that those images may have been taken during winter when the trees are totally defoliated. So
it can look a little different.
Yeah, so if you show up in the middle of summertime, you know, those trees might be really well flushed out and you might have more obstructions. The one thing I will suggest is, in addition to looking at it from the overhead standpoint, also look at the street view. You'd be surprised. Sometimes you actually get a street view that goes through the campground, or at least on like the main street by it. So it just gives you an extra perspective on it.
So when we get to camp, first thing we do, or one of the first things we do as we're setting up, is get the internet up and running. That way we can start checking to see, are they going to work? And if so, what the speeds are like. So we'll run speed tests on each system, see how Starlink's doing, see how the Peplink's doing, and if we need to, you know, switch between AT&T and Verizon because one's just outperforming the other, we'll do that, and we'll get that set up. and running.
And that way I just feel more confident going into Monday morning in a new location that I'm going to have, reliable internet. We say you can't rely on the campground Wi-Fi, and I'd say, 95% of the time that's the case. But there are some times where the campground actually has pretty decent Wi-Fi, or maybe like you're near a repeater, and so it's pretty decent. I will often still set that Wi-Fi, the campground Wi-Fi, up on my laptop. So worst case scenario, if I was on, a Teams call and one of our internet solutions went down, I have another one that I can hopefully hop over to. Again, it's just redundancy.
Yeah, and we test it to make sure we know how good it is or isn't.
If it's even going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's only been, I think twice.
Yeah, in over 2 years of full-time travel, there's only been, I can think of 2 places where the internet was just, it didn't work. And I actually did need to go to a different location to work. And sometimes that was just working from the vehicle, driving to an area where there was good cell coverage, tethering to my phone, and then working from there.
And both of those were, really heavily wooded areas. It was, the coast of Oregon in a state park, and in Glacier, or just outside of Glacier National Park.
Yeah.
And, so we were well into the trees. So Starlink was a no-go. I think the one in Oregon, there just wasn't cell coverage there. And when we were in Glacier, we had great cell coverage. We had 5 bars of service. The problem was there was so many people there because it was so busy. There was no bandwidth. So even though we had 5 bars of service to the tower, there was just nothing there to go around. Yeah. So that is another lesson too. Just because you have, bars doesn't equate to speeds. It just means you're connected to a cell tower. So that was one where, in the early mornings when Frances would get up, she could actually work. And then as people started to wake up, service would drop until it basically stopped. And then, sometimes during the day when people left and went into Glacier, we were fine again. Yeah. But then they'd come back and we'd lose service.
And luckily that campground did have decent Wi-Fi in their clubhouse. So I was able to kind of move around. Yeah. But twice in over 2 years of full timing with this setup, I think is actually pretty impressive.
Yeah. We're using, Starlink, Verizon, and AT&T. We recognize T-Mobile right now is our kind of backup to a backup plan. We don't have anything with them. But if we showed up someplace and found out that our other options weren't working and T-Mobile was available there and working, we would do that. I mean, right now, T-Mobile has their home internet that they're offering right now. That's a pretty sweet deal. I mean, it's like $50 a month, I think. Yeah. It's designed to be home internet as far as speeds and data. There's been some rumblings that they're going to change that and break it off and make it truly home, no travel, and then come out with a travel version that would probably be more money and probably be, either slower speeds or some data caps. As far as I know, they haven't done that yet. Verizon also has a home internet that they've come out with since T-Mobile launched theirs. Sounds similar, at least as far as I know. They haven't gotten to those talks of making it so you can't travel with it just yet. So that could be an option for somebody who doesn't already use Verizon service. So
there's multiple options out there. For us, this has worked really well.
Yeah. And it may change over time. We may end up with some new hardware. We'll see. But so far, we're good. Yeah. We like it.
Hopefully, if you are looking for an internet solution that you need to be reliable while you're on the road so that you can work, hopefully you found this video helpful.
Yeah. Enjoy.
Enjoy.